Tonight, we take you inside the Strait of Hormuz, where a U.S. aircraft carrier moving through one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth suddenly finds itself confronted by a swarm of 60 Iranian boats. In the next 9 minutes, every second matters.
After President Trump announced the 2-week ceasefire, Iran then said it had closed the Strait of Hormuz. What you just saw there was an Iranian ballistic missile with a cluster warhead. Affected by Iran's attempted closure of the Strait of Hormuz, warships will be deployed.
What's going on? They're militarily defeated, and now we're going to open up the Gulf, with or without them. But that'll be open. We're going to be, or the Strait as they call it.
It sits on the water like a city that has learned how to float. 1,092 feet of Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. 100,000 tons of sovereign American territory, gliding at a walking pace through the narrowest choke point on Earth. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, CVN-69, built for $6.2 billion in today's money, carries 44 FA-18EF Super Hornets, each worth $67 million. It carries 5 EA-18G Growler electronic warfare jets at $68 million each. It carries 2 nuclear reactors that will not need refueling for 20 years. It carries 5,000 sailors, a 4.5-acre flight deck, and the single largest concentration of American air power outside the continental United States. Right now, at 0647 local time, it is making 5 knots through the Strait of Hormuz, and it does not know that 60 boats are already in the water. The strait is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. Shipping lanes compress that to roughly 6 miles of navigable channel. A carrier strike group in those lanes is the naval equivalent of driving a school bus through a parking garage. The Eisenhower is bracketed by her escorts. The guided missile cruiser USS Vela Gulf, CG-72, to the north, and the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Gravely, DDG-107, riding 3 miles to the southeast. Each of those escorts carries 96 vertical launch cells, loaded with a mix of SM-2 Block 3A surface-to-air missiles at $2.1 million each, and Tomahawk cruise missiles at $2.2 million each. Together, the 3 ships hold roughly $4.6 billion of American hardware. The boats coming toward them cost about $25,000 apiece. Fiberglass hulls, twin outboard Yamaha engines. The entire Iranian swarm fleet approaching that morning would total $1.5 million. Roughly the cost of a single training sortie for one of those Super Hornets, burning holes in the sky overhead. This is a story about what happens when a $4.6 billion formation meets an idea that costs less than a used pickup truck per unit. The Eisenhower's transit through Hormuz was planned 72 hours in advance, coordinated with Bahrain-based 5th Fleet headquarters 350 nautical miles to the southwest. A carrier transit through the strait is not subtle. Satellite imagery, commercial ship tracking, fishing boat observation, and Iranian coastal radar installations along the northern shore, all of it watches. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN, maintains 14 bases along the Iranian coastline from Bandar Abbas to Jask, a stretch of roughly 200 nautical miles. Every one of those bases tracks every American warship that enters the strait. The Americans know they are being watched. The Iranians know the Americans know. The entire transit is a mutual performance of awareness, and it has been this way since 1988. What makes this morning different begins at a fishing port 11 nautical miles northeast of the carrier's projected track. Bandar-e-Jazq sits at the eastern mouth of the strait, a sun-bleached concrete quay that normally hosts 30 to 40 small dhows and fishing skiffs. At 0620 local time, 27 minutes before the Eisenhower enters the narrowest section of the channel, the first wave of fast attack craft begins leaving the harbor in pairs. They are a mix of Iranian-built Paykop-class fast inshore attack craft and smaller Ashura-class boats, supplemented by civilian rigid-hull inflatables modified with weapons mounts. The Paykop is 46 feet long, powered by twin diesel water-jet engines capable of 52 knots, roughly 60 miles per hour on flat water. It carries a crew of 3 and either 2 Nasser-1 anti-ship cruise missiles or a single 324mm torpedo tube. The Nasser-1 is a short-range anti-ship missile derived from the Chinese C-704, with a range of 22 miles and a 330-pound warhead traveling at roughly 680 miles per hour just above the wave tops. The cost per Paykop boat is approximately $500,000. The cost per Nasser-1 missile is roughly $200,000. Each one is basically a rounding error against what it is aimed at. The smaller Ashura-class boats carry no missiles at all. They carry rocket-propelled grenades, DSHK 12.7mm heavy machine guns, and in 3 cases, nothing but speed. Their job is not to shoot. Their job is to exist in the same water at the same time, in numbers that make targeting decisions take 4 seconds longer than they should. 16 miles to the west of Jazq, a second cluster launches from a concealed inlet near Kuhestak. The Eisenhower's SPS-48E air search radar, a rotating antenna capable of tracking 300 airborne contacts simultaneously out to 250 nautical miles, is functionally useless against fiberglass boats with a radar cross-section smaller than a Pelican.
Surface search falls to the SPS-67 radar and the SPQ-9B, a lower frequency system designed to find sea-skimming missiles and small surface contacts in clutter. The problem is not detection. The SPQ-9B will see these boats. The problem is identification. At 0651 local time, the Eisenhower's Combat Information Center, the CIC, logs 14 new surface contacts emerging from the eastern shoreline. 4 minutes later, the count is 23. By 0658, it is 41. Every one of them is headed southwest into the shipping lanes at speeds between 35 and 52 knots. The watch officer has a classification problem. The Strait of Hormuz sees roughly 17 million barrels of oil pass through it every day, carried by tankers, serviced by tugs, surrounded by fishing vessels and Coast Guard cutters, and recreational boats from Oman and the UAE. On any given morning, the surface picture in the strait contains 200 to 400 contacts. Most of them are harmless. The rules of engagement require positive identification before any weapon release. A fishing boat that happens to be moving at 40 knots in the same direction as 59 other boats is not a valid target until it demonstrates hostile intent or hostile action. Every sailor in that CIC knows what happened to Iran Air Flight 655 in 1988, when the cruiser USS Vincennes misidentified an Airbus A300 civilian airliner and killed 290 people. That memory is baked into the ROE like scar tissue. So the watch officer does what the rules demand. He reports up the chain. He requests the carrier launch its alert helicopter, an MH-60R Seahawk armed with AGM-114 Hellfire missiles at $17,000 each, and an airborne radar that can classify surface contacts at 40 nautical miles. He requests the Gravely close to intercept distance. He does everything right, and every second he spends doing it right, the boats get 900 yards closer.
11 nautical miles to the southeast, aboard the Gravely. The tactical action officer is watching the same picture on a Link 16 display. She has her own problem. The Arleigh Burke destroyer carries a 5-inch Mark 45 naval gun that can fire 20 rounds per minute at surface targets out to 13 nautical miles. It carries 2 Phalanx Seawes close-in weapon systems, automated 20mm Gatling guns that fire 4,500 rounds per minute at incoming missiles, each round costing roughly $30. The entire magazine lasting 15 seconds of continuous fire. It carries 8 Harpoon anti-ship missiles designed to kill frigates and destroyers, not speedboats. Shooting a $1.5 million Harpoon at a $25,000 inflatable boat is not just wasteful, it probably will not work. The Harpoon's seeker head looks for metal ships with large radar returns. A fiberglass skiff might not even register. The Gravely's best anti-swarm weapons are her 2 25mm Mark 38 chain guns and whatever her crew can fire from the rails with small arms. Total cost of the chain gun systems, about $400,000. Total cost of the approaching swarm, $1.5 million.
For the first time in this transit, the economics are almost even. And that is exactly the point. What the IRGCN commander overseeing this operation from a hardened bunker 8 miles inland from Bandar Abbas designed was not a naval battle. He designed a decision crisis. The swarm's purpose is not to sink the Eisenhower. No one in Tehran believes 60 speedboats will sink a nuclear carrier. The swarm's purpose is to force 5,000 Americans to make 60 targeting decisions in under 3 minutes, while transiting a choke point too narrow to maneuver, too shallow to accelerate, and too politically sensitive to evacuate. If one of those decisions is wrong, if a fishing boat burns, if a civilian dhow takes a burst of 20mm, then the operation has already succeeded. The weapon is not the boat. The weapon is the decision. The Seahawk lifts off the Eisenhower's flight deck at 07:03 local time. It takes 90 seconds to reach 500 feet and begin its sensor sweep. The crew of 3, pilot, co-pilot, sensor operator, begins classifying contacts from west to east. Each classification takes approximately 8 seconds using the APS-153 multimode radar and the MX-15 electro-optical turret. At 8 seconds per contact and 41 contacts at last count, full classification will take roughly 5.5 minutes. By then, the lead boats will be inside 4 nautical miles of the carrier. 5 nautical miles north of the carrier, the Vela Gulf's captain makes a call. He orders his ship to 25 knots on an intercept heading northeast, placing 10,000 tons of guided missile cruiser between the swarm and the Eisenhower's beam. The Vela Gulf carries the same Aegis combat system as the Gravely, the Spy-1B phased array radar. 4 fixed panels, each scanning a 90-degree quadrant, designed to track ballistic missiles in the upper atmosphere. It is the most sophisticated radar system afloat. It was built to find warheads falling from space at Mach 15, roughly 11,500 miles per hour. Right now, it is trying to distinguish between fishing boats and attack craft moving at 60 miles per hour on a surface full of whitecaps. Like using a telescope to read a license plate in a parking lot. At 07:06 local time, the CIC count reaches 53 surface contacts inbound. 7 more have appeared from the direction of Kuhestak. The swarm is now arranged in a rough crescent, its leading edge 6 nautical miles from the Eisenhower, its trailing boats still 12 nautical miles out. The crescent shape is not accidental. It forces the American escorts to choose which arc to cover. Defending the northern arc exposes the south.
defending the east, exposes the northwest. There is no geometry that covers all 60 boats with 3 ships. At 0708, the Eisenhower's captain orders the carrier to increase speed to 12 knots and begin a turn to starboard, angling the ship's bow toward the wider water to the south. This is the first rule. Do not get pinned in the narrows. But at 12 knots, a Nimitz-class carrier needs 3,200 yards to complete a 90-degree turn. The shipping lane is 6 miles wide. The turn will consume a third of the available water.
What the Iranian commander did not know was that 45 minutes before his first boats cleared the harbor at Yask, a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, flying at 28,000 feet, 140 nautical miles to the southwest, had already cataloged every boat in every harbor along the Iranian coast, using its APS-154 Advanced Airborne Sensor, a synthetic aperture radar capable of imaging surface contacts at ranges exceeding 200 nautical miles, with resolution fine enough to count outboard engines. The Poseidon crew had transmitted a complete pre-transit surface picture to 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain at 0601. When the boats began moving at 0620, the departure was tracked in near real time by a second asset, an MQ-4C Triton unmanned aircraft. Wingspan 131 feet, cruising at 56,000 feet, 190 nautical miles to the south. The Triton's ZPY-3 multifunction active sensor had been painting the Iranian coastline continuously for 11 hours. Every boat had a track number before its crew finished morning prayers. The decision crisis the IRGCN commander designed required confusion. What he got was confirmation. Back in the CIC aboard the Eisenhower, the picture is dense but not dark. The pre-transit intelligence identified 14 PICAP-class fast attack craft, 22 Ashura boats, and 24 unclassified small craft in the swarm. The Seahawk has now confirmed weapons mounts on 11 of the lead boats. Under the standing rules of engagement, a boat carrying visible weapons and moving directly at a U.S. warship at attack speed constitutes demonstrated hostile intent. The watch officer does not need to wait for a missile launch. At 0710 local time, the Gravely fires the first shots. Not a missile, not the 5-inch gun. The forward Mark 38 Mod 2 chain gun opens up at 2,200 yards on the 3 lead boats approaching from the east. The 25mm rounds travel at 3,600 feet per second. Each one costs roughly $35. The first burst, 20 rounds across 4 seconds, tears the bow off a PICAP-class boat at an angle that flips the wreckage sideways into the boat running beside it. 2 boats removed for $700 in ammunition. A ship worth $2.2 billion just defended itself with the equivalent of a restaurant dinner tab. The swarm reacts. It was trained to react. The remaining boats split. 18 break south, accelerating to 52 knots on a heading that will put them behind the Eisenhower's stern within 4 minutes. 12 continue east toward the Gravely, spacing out to 300-yard intervals to complicate targeting. The remaining 28 hold their crescent and begin to compress from the north, closing to within 5 nautical miles of the Vela Gulf. 3 miles to the north, the Vela Gulf opens fire. Her forward 5-inch gun begins putting high-explosive rounds into the water 500 yards ahead of the northern group. Warning shots. The 5-inch round weighs 70 pounds and travels at 2,690 feet per second. Each one costs $2,000. The geysers erupt in a line that any boat driver can read. Come closer, and this happens to you instead of the water. The northern group does not stop. 6 boats peel off. The other 22 accelerate. At 0712 local time,
The first Nasser-1 anti-ship missile launches from a Picap-class boat in the Eastern Group, 4.1 nautical miles from the Gravely. The missile drops off its rail, ignites its solid rocket booster, and accelerates to its cruise speed of Mach 0.98, roughly 680 miles per hour, at an altitude of 15 feet above the wave tops. Time to impact at that range, approximately 22 seconds. The Gravely's Spy-1D radar locks the missile before the booster finishes burning. The Phalanx CWS, a white dome the size of a dumpster bolted to the ship's superstructure, swivels and begins tracking. The system is fully automatic. At 1,500 yards, it fires. The 20mm tungsten penetrator rounds create a wall of metal in the missile's flight path. The Nasser-1 flies into that wall at 680 miles per hour and disintegrates 800 yards from the ship's hull. Total engagement time, 6 seconds. Total ammunition cost, approximately $2,400. The missile it just killed cost $200,000. The economics just inverted again, and this time, they favor the Americans. But the Phalanx has a limitation that makes every surface warfare officer lose sleep. It carries 1,550 rounds. At 4,500 rounds per minute, that is roughly 20 seconds of trigger time. One engagement might use 300 rounds. The Gravely has 2 CWIS mounts. If 5 missiles come at the same time from different bearings, the math stops working. A second Nasser-1 fires from the northern arc, targeted at the Vela Gulf. Then a third from a different boat. Then a fourth. In 8 seconds, 4 missiles are in the air, all sea skimming, all on different bearings. IRGCN doctrine calls this a saturation salvo. The term is older than most of the boat crews firing them. The idea is as old as naval warfare. Throw more arrows than the other side has shields. The Vela Gulf's Aegis system was built for exactly this. The Spy-1B tracks all 4 missiles simultaneously and begins pairing them with interceptors. But the captain makes a decision that will matter in the after-action report for years. He does not fire SM-2 missiles at the inbound Nasser-1s. An SM-2 Block 3A costs $2.1 million and is designed to kill aircraft and cruise missiles at ranges up to 90 nautical miles. Using it at 4 miles against a $200,000 anti-ship missile is like swatting a fly with a Steinway piano. Instead, he relies on the 2 CWIS mounts and orders the electronic warfare suite into active jamming. The SLQ-32 electronic warfare system aboard the Vela Gulf pumps out a wall of electromagnetic noise across the frequency bands the Nasser-1's active radar seeker uses for terminal guidance. The Nasser-1 is a fire-and-forget missile, but its seeker is relatively simple, a derivative of Chinese technology from the early 2000s. Against a modern jammer, it has the electronic resilience of a garage door opener. The first missile loses lock at 2,100 yards. It corkscrews right, hits the surface, and detonates on impact with the water 400 yards off the cruiser's port beam. The blast kicks a geyser 60 feet high. The second missile holds lock 3 seconds longer, close enough for the forward CWES to engage. It fires for 4 seconds. The missile vanishes into spray and fragments at 600 yards. The third missile was targeted poorly and passes 1,200 yards astern without the seeker ever acquiring the ship. It flies for another 9 seconds before hitting the surface and exploding harmlessly. The fourth missile finds the Vela Gulf. It strikes the port side midships, 6 feet above the waterline, just forward of the number 2 exhaust stack. The 330-pound warhead detonates on impact. The blast tears a hole roughly 12 feet by 8 feet in the hull plating and starts a fire in the auxiliary machinery room. The ship shudders. Damage control alarms sound across all decks. 3 sailors are killed instantly. 11 more are wounded, 4 critically. The Vela Gulf lists 2 degrees to port and begins taking water. The cruiser does not stop fighting. Her Aegis system remains online. Her gun remains firing.
But the hit changes the calculus aboard every American ship in the formation. The Carrier Strike Group has just taken its first combat damage in an active engagement with Iranian naval forces. And every second of what happens next will be reviewed by 435 members of Congress, the Joint Chiefs, and roughly 200 million people on the internet. 4 miles above the strait, 2 FA-18E Super Hornets from VFA-86, the Sidewinders, have been holding in a racetrack pattern since 0655. They were launched as a precautionary combat air patrol before the swarm was even fully detected. Each aircraft carries 4 AIM-9X Sidewinder heat-seeking missiles at $472,000 each and a 20mm M61A2 Vulcan cannon with 578 rounds. The AIM-9X was designed to kill fighter jets pulling 9 Gs at Mach 2. Using it against a wooden boat doing 60 miles per hour is a sentence that belongs in a comedy sketch, not a combat report. But the Vulcan cannon works just fine. At 0714 local time, both Super Hornets roll in. The lead aircraft descends to 1,200 feet and begins a strafing run on the southern arc of the swarm, the 18 boats that had broken off to circle behind the carrier. The M61A2 fires at 6,000 rounds per minute. Each round is a 20mm high-explosive incendiary projectile moving at 3,380 feet per second. The pilot fires a 2-second burst, 200 rounds. Cost? Approximately $14,000. The burst walks across 3 boats in a line. The first one comes apart. The second one catches fire and begins circling with a dead helmsman. The third takes hits to its engines and goes dead in the water. The second Super Hornet hits the southern arc from the opposite bearing 4 seconds later. Same result. 2 more boats destroyed, 1 disabled. The southern threat is shredded in 11 seconds of combined gun time. $28,000 in ammunition against $125,000 in boats. The pilots pull up, re-enter their holding pattern, and wait. 6 nautical miles to the north, the situation is different.
The 22 boats in the northern group are now within 3 nautical miles of the Vela Gulf, which is fighting a fire and trying to classify the boats while its damage control teams seal a compartment below the waterline. The Gravely is too far south to provide gun support. The Seahawk helicopter is out of position, having spent its time classifying the eastern group. The Eisenhower makes a call that no carrier captain wants to make. She launches 2 more Super Hornets, not for air superiority, but for close-in surface engagement inside the strait itself. These jets will operate below 2,000 feet in the same airspace as helicopters and surface-to-air fire from the Iranian boats, which carry MISOG-2 man-portable air defense missiles, Iranian copies of the Chinese QW-18, effective to roughly 14,000 feet at a cost of about $38,000 each. The risk is real. A $67 million Super Hornet flying at 1,200 feet and 400 knots is inside the engagement envelope of a $38,000 shoulder-fired missile. The math is cruel in both directions. At 0716 local time, 3 events happen within 45 seconds of each other. The 2 new Super Hornets begin their descent toward the northern group. the Gravely fires 2 Hellfire missiles from its embarked helicopter at boats in the Eastern Remnant, deleting them at $117,000 per kill. And the IRGCN commander, in his bunker near Bandar Abbas, watching the operation unfold through a combination of coastal radar and spotty UHF radio reports, realizes his swarm has lost 14 boats in 6 minutes, without forcing the Eisenhower to stop, turn back, or call off the transit. The decision crisis he designed has been answered. The answer is that the Americans had already decided before the first boat cleared the harbor. The northern group begins to scatter. 8 boats turn east, back toward Iranian waters. 6 hold course toward the Vela Gulf. The remaining 8 begin dumping weapons overboard, a pre-planned disengagement protocol that transforms attack craft back into unarmed civilian boats in under 30 seconds. The rocket launchers splash. The machine guns go over the side. Suddenly, 8 boats in the northern group are just fishermen who happen to be having a very strange morning. The rules of engagement snap shut like a trap. Those 8 boats are now untouchable. No weapons, no hostile action, no hostile intent. They slow to 10 knots and begin heading northeast. The Americans track them, but cannot fire. The 6 boats that hold course toward the Vela Gulf fire their remaining ordnance. 2 more Nasser-1 missiles launch. 1 unguided rocket salvo from an Ashura-class boat streaks across the water. 12,107mm rockets fanning out in a pattern meant for shore bombardment, not anti-ship warfare. The rockets have a range of roughly 5 miles and carry 4-pound warheads against a 10,000-ton cruiser. They are nuisance weapons, but one of the 12 hits the Gulf's bridge wing, wounding 2 more sailors and destroying an exterior communications antenna. The 2 Nasser-1 missiles are engaged by the Gravely's CIWS from 4 miles south. Both are destroyed over the water. The CIWS has now fired 4 engagements. Ammunition remaining, roughly 60%. Still functional, still the cheapest effective weapon in the fight. At 0719 local time, the Super Hornets reach the northern group. 1 fires an AIM-9X Sidewinder at a PACAP-class boat that has just launched a missile. A $472,000 infrared-guided air-to-air missile designed to pull 60 Gs chasing a fighter jet at Mach 2 drops to sea level and hits a 46-foot fiberglass boat doing 52 knots. The Sidewinder's 20-pound blast fragmentation warhead, meant to shatter a titanium airframe, erases the boat entirely. Nothing remains but a scorch mark on the surface of the strait. The second Super Hornet uses its cannon. 3 bursts, 3 boats, $42,000. By 0722 local time, 15 minutes after the first chain gun burst from the Gravely, the swarm is functionally destroyed. 23 boats sunk or disabled, 8 disarmed and retreating, the remainder scattering east toward Iranian territorial waters at full speed. The Vela Gulf is damaged but operational, maintaining 18 knots with a 2-degree list, her fire contained to 1 compartment. The Eisenhower has completed her turn and is accelerating south toward the Gulf of Oman at 22 knots, her air wings cycling overhead in stacked combat air patrols. The final accounting reads like the footnote to a very expensive argument. Nobody won. 23 Iranian boats destroyed. Estimated Iranian material losses, approximately $8.6 million, including missiles expended. American material expended, approximately $1.9 million in ammunition across all platforms. American damage: 1 cruiser requiring 4 months of yard repair at an estimated cost of $70 million. 5 Americans killed, 13 wounded. The IRGCN lost an estimated 40 to 55 personnel, figures Tehran will never confirm. A $25,000 fiberglass boat with a $200,000 missile put a $70 million hole in a billion-dollar cruiser. The IRGCN will call that a victory. The U.S. Navy will call the transit completed. Both will be telling the truth. Neither will be telling the whole truth. The Eisenhower clears the strait at 08:14 local time and enters the Gulf of Oman. Behind her, the Vela Gulf limps south at reduced speed, escorted by the Gravely. Somewhere in a bunker near Bandar Abbas, an IRGCN commander reviews his losses and begins planning the next version. Somewhere in a Pentagon briefing room, 6,800 miles to the west, a Navy captain explains to a room of congressional staffers why a $4.6 billion strike group needed a $2,400 burst of 20mm rounds to survive the morning. The staffers take notes. The captain does not mention that the $2,400 burst worked. That is not the part Congress cares about.